All right, so now refresh the page, Lindsay, over on YouTube, and see if it gives you the little mute symbol. And I'm doing it too to see if it'll let me. Yeah. So just mute it. You see it down there at the bottom? Yeah?
Yep, got it.
Yeah, just mute it. That way you can always, flip back and see if there's any comments. Since we got a couple people watching, but one of them is you. So anybody's watching, say what's up. Lindsay's testing the comments. All right, so Hitchcock, we will record this episode of One of the Greats. I'll let you kind of talk about why you picked it and stuff at the beginning. And hell, you might be the second P at this point, Lindsay. Hit a lot of episodes lately.
I'm the P.
I love it. Yeah, I love it. All right. So if you're ready, let me
Sorry. Weird things happening on my camera.
Start my garage.
I just spit out my breath mint.
I can't smell your breath on the stream. You didn't have to do that.
I was trying to erase grogginess, not cover up my bad breath.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, technology hasn't quite gotten there yet. I'm sure someday we'll be able to smell through technology. It'll be weird. Actually, let me just remind my patrons real quick. Cappy. Go over to the patron chat. Paste. Going live to talk some Hitchcock if you want to join in. All right, I got my list here. I'll tell you what, I'm recording your audio just like we did last time, so you shouldn't have to worry about anything there. And just give me like 5 seconds of silence. I'm going to take out this. I might fucking turn it off. Oh, no, I'll leave it on in case I turn it on later. I got this little space heater out here, but as you know, it wasn't very cold today. So I thought I might need it, but turns out I don't really. All right. You good?
Yep.
All right. Just give me like 5 seconds. I'll come in, do the intro, and we'll do the episode. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Two Ps on a podcast. And we are Two Ps tonight. Gerald here with you. And I have a bit of a show regular as of late back with me tonight. It's always a delight when I'm able to chat with her and get her back on the show. She was just on. I'm trying to think of the release schedule for these episodes. And I feel like it's 2 weeks back to back because when this airs, it'll be a week removed from when we did our best of 2022 movies. And now you're back. Lindsay Dunn is here from one of my stories, also a personal friend of mine here local to me. And she's back on the Ps. What's up? Welcome back.
Good evening.
Started out with it. Well, go ahead and tell everybody. So what are we counting down tonight? You kind of led into it there a little bit with your impersonation, which I liked. That was good. That was a good effort. That's better than I could do.
I was listening to YouTube clips before to practice that.
Nice.
Well, tonight, Gerald, we are talking about the master of suspense himself, Mr. Alfred Hitchcock.
That's correct. So our favorite Hitchcock movies, our top 5 Hitchcock films. We're going to get into it, obviously, shortly with our top 5s. And I'm assuming, I say that a lot. And sometimes it turns out to not be true, but sometimes I say, like, I'm assuming a lot of crossover, and sometimes my guests will surprise me. But I feel like Hitchcock has at least a few that are just like irrefutable, absolute divine classics that I just don't see how we would not cross over on at least 2 or 3. But I'll hold that because, like I said, sometimes I get really surprised, and maybe I'm a little too basic in my picks. But I do want to kind of talk a little bit about the research. What's up, Dan? He just joined us over in the chat. What's up, brother?
I see that. Dan is back.
He's probably in the middle of editing an episode right now, and now he's listening to this one. The guy just can't get enough of me.
Multitasking.
He's gonna have to take this out and post too. He's probably like, stop talking. So I want to talk a little bit about our research for the Hitchcock list, Lindsay. And for me, I got something I got to tell you. Okay. But I want to hear
Okay.
you first. So I want to hear your research kind of approach first. First of all, you chose this list. You kind of said, "Hey, have you
Yes.
done that yet?" We thought we might be
Mhm.
able to squeeze it back in October when we did our Halloween episodes, but I didn't have enough room to fit it in this past October. But I said, that's fine. We'll just do Hitchcock whenever you want to do Hitchcock. So here we are in early February talking about the guy, but I think he transcends months. It doesn't really matter what month it is. We can talk about Hitchcock. But when you were doing your research, how was it for you? I mean, are you like really into this guy's filmography and it's kind of like second nature to you, or did you kind of have to refresh your memory a little bit?
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, Hitchcock is I feel like I've been asked before, how did you why did you decide to spend so much time with movies? And I feel like I should answer that with Hitchcock it being kind of my birth as a film critic because it was the
Okay.
first time I became aware of the fact that a director can have a style, a thing they do, recognizable fingerprints they can put all over their movies. And this guy was the subject of my pathfinder in library school. Probably I don't know how many librarians you know, but one of the research topics we all have to do is called a pathfinder, where basically you're finding all these resources that if somebody wanted to study any particular thing, they could follow your guides of how to go into that. So I did my pathfinder on Alfred Hitchcock and
Okay.
had to research. It's not research him, but research how you research Hitchcock.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
yeah, the guy has directed 59 movies.
Yeah.
I mean,
That
it's
segues a little bit
yeah.
to what I have to tell you. So as I was doing my research and I was kind of looking at, his filmography, IMDb and Letterboxd and, just kind of Googling Hitchcock movies. I don't know 100%, but I think I'm like 98% sure that I've only seen about 10 of his movies.
Mhm.
And which really, really surprised me because the ones that I have seen, and especially the ones that are going to make my top five, I've seen multiple times and I love them. Some of them I studied in college kind of as a necessity. And then I found myself kind of revisiting them. They really grow on me too. A lot of these movies, like I didn't necessarily like them or wasn't super into them the first time I saw them. And now with each viewing, they get a little bit more important to me and I like them a little bit more. But I don't know, that surprised me. Now you said, what'd you say, 54? Is that what you said?
59 movies.
59? So
Yeah,
how many
looking
have you
at
seen roughly?
I've seen almost all of them.
Wow.
I didn't go through and count, but Martin Scorsese has 29 movies, Ridley Scott 28, Steven Spielberg 35, Robert
Mhm.
Altman 35. So if you look at
Yeah,
these
it's a
are
lot.
I looked up a website who has directed the most movies. There was only one director that had directed 3 more movies than Hitchcock, and I don't remember who that guy's name was, honestly. Looking at his filmography, I was like, I don't even recognize any of these movies. But he's probably directed the most movies, and so many of them are hits. They're so he invented so many horror tropes and is
Sure.
so influential that I think it's almost invisible and people don't know about it. Um,
Mhm.
honestly, I'll confess something to you, Gerald.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, the reason I wanted to do this show is because of a podcast of yours I was listening to in October,
Oh,
where
wow.
you were talking about I believe your favorite horror franchises was the topic,
Mhm.
and you made a statement about the Friday the 13th series. You said
Mhm.
this franchise invented the slasher was a statement you made.
Oh,
And I
wow,
was
okay.
like, "Oh, we gotta get on and
You're
talk about
quoting me, huh?
Hitchcock because what about Psycho?" Yes, I'm quoting you. So
Wow.
I wanted I was kind of you remember when I did Blumhouse and I
I
was
think I said camp slasher though, didn't I? I don't
You
know. I
might have
don't
said the
remember.
contemporary you might have said the contemporary slasher. I'll give you a
Okay,
pass,
all right.
Gerald. I'm not here to,
I mean,
to
maybe I
point
did. I
out,
don't know, but I
but
just doesn't sound like something I would say. Maybe camp slasher, or I don't know. But yeah, but go ahead. I mean,
yeah.
who knows? Maybe I was drunk. I don't know.
Yeah. I just think that he's wonderful, and,
Yeah.
I could probably geek out about Alfred Hitchcock all night if you really wanted to, but I just think, what he did for movies is almost so much that it's taken a lot for granted, and looking at, he was the master of suspense. He's the master of the scenario. We just talked about, talking about what makes a good horror movie. A lot of times it's about introducing the right scenario. And he would take this scenario, like, let's pretend, for example, and this isn't one of my favorite movies, so it's not a spoiler, but let's pretend you're a priest and you are sworn to secrecy when anybody confesses, and somebody comes to you and confesses they committed a murder. What would you do? It's like an
Right.
outlandish scenario like that. Who
Right.
would come up with something? Alfred Hitchcock, that's who. And so he just paved the
Right. And
way for horror in such a big way.
I agree. And to your point of that example too, I mean, that's something that's somewhat rooted in reality too. Like it's not super far fetched to
Hmm.
think that something like that might happen. Like, I know the whole doctor patient, confidentiality thing, but what if your patient tells you something and, I killed a person or I'm a serial killer or whatever. And, same thing could be said from a confession standpoint for a priest. So, and one thing that I think everything you said, I agree with. One thing I'll say about Hitchcock too is that, I really started studying him in college, but one thing that really kind of fascinated me, and we'll talk about it with some of the movies that I'm definitely going to mention tonight. I assume you will too. But he takes these like everyday kind of commonplace scenarios and items and things and situations and makes them really scary and really horrific. Like,
Hmm.
we'll talk about it as we get it. I don't want to give away any spoilers, but there's some like simple kind of like daily things that we take for granted in our lives that are always around us that you don't think of as a threat or as anything that's going to be considered quote unquote horrific. But Hitchcock somehow takes that basic premise and will scare the shit out of you. And then it'll make you question it the next time you get in the shower, if you know what I'm saying, or whatever he might be playing with in that particular project. So I agree with you. I don't think I said slasher though. I'm gonna stick with camp slasher. But I know you. You're probably gonna go back and you're probably gonna listen. You're gonna pull a little quote and you're gonna play it for me next time we get together. But that's fine. So Hitchcock is the man, and as a horror fanatic, obviously he's one of the masters and one of the foundation pieces to the genre, with films like Psycho and some other stuff that'll come up tonight. So everything you said was said beautifully. Why don't we get into our list, Lindsay? Let's go ahead and talk about our top 5 movies from Alfred Hitchcock. Might be a shorter episode depending on the length of crossover, but we can just kind of pine over his catalog, so that's fine. You want to get us started? What is your number 5 Hitchcock movie?
My number 5 is the 1944 Lifeboat.
I've never seen this one. Now, look, I'm just gonna tell you. I know you. You're doing the librarian thing. You do the research. You're a smart cookie. If you're coming in here with these movies, I haven't seen this. I'm just gonna be like I haven't seen it. But I'm also making a list, so I'm gonna have a little to do list. I think you're probably
Yeah.
gonna give me homework, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, that's my whole goal in doing this is not to show how much more I know about Hitchcock than you, Gerald. I think I probably do. I wouldn't swear to it, but it's really to advertise these movies and intrigue people enough that they will want to go and seek them out and watch them. That is
Yeah,
my goal.
for sure, and I respect that, and I love that because I'll be one of those people.
Yeah, and I did surprise you with Blumhouse. I think I might surprise you again. But
Hmm.
Lifeboat. This is based on a John Steinbeck short story, and I just watched this again last night in preparation for this podcast. It's a formula that has been repeated over and over again, but this is one of what's interesting about this one is it's one of Hitchcock's limited setting movies. So he would do these movies where it would be like he gave himself a restriction and was able to play in that sandbox. And that restriction was this whole movie takes place on a lifeboat. and it's strangers thrown together. They have just been their ship has just been bombed by a German ship of some kind, and they're all surviving in this one lifeboat. People from different classes, different races, different life experiences, and they have to live together or die alone, as they would say in Lost. And you have,
Hmm.
this inspired such things as The Stand, of Lost, and even the show I'm watching right now, 1899. It's like
Hmm.
there's this disaster and we all have to survive together. So it all took place in this tiny little lifeboat that gave Hitchcock a fun way to do his regular cameo. It ended up being on a newspaper. So
Hmm.
this is a very, very cool movie that I hadn't watched in years, but I was like, I want to watch it for this episode to see if I can put it in here. And it definitely captured my attention right away.
All right. Well, it's one I'm going to have to check out. I haven't seen it, but as you were talking before you started kind of giving the similarities there, I also kind of was thinking of some of that stuff, like Lost and just kind of like, stranded storyline. I mean, like you said, I mean, that's been done 100 times since this. So great pick. It's one I need to check out. What was the year on Lifeboat again? Lindsay, do you have it there?
1944.
44.
Mhm.
Mine
I
is
found
10
it
years
on a
later.
random I found it on a
Go ahead.
random, so I found it for free on a random, station on Roku, so you can find it for free on streaming somewhere.
Yeah, if you can find free Hitchcock, then you're winning. So do that for sure. Mine is 10 years later, 1954. It's Dial M for Murder, is a movie that I will confess that I haven't seen in way too long. This is one of those movies that I did have to watch for college. It was a American Gothic course, I believe, that I had at the time, and we watched a lot of Hitchcock. There was like a 2-week segment where we only studied Hitchcock, and this was one of the movies that we watched. And it did stick with me. Like, I remember thinking like, yeah, it's an old movie. It's, the acting's a little outdated and that kind of thing. And I haven't revisited it in quite a while, but at the time I was thinking that. But what my professor kind of told me and what I kind of learned about the production of the movie is what kind of really intrigued me. It is a good movie about, this guy that basically wants to have his wife killed because she's rich and he's afraid that she's going to leave him for another man. So before she can do that, he wants to have her killed, which in essence means he would get her inheritance and so on. So that's kind of the plot of the movie. There's a couple twists in there, of course, because it's Hitchcock, but that's the general plot. But what was interesting, what I learned, and forgive me, I'm like 20 years removed from a lot of these facts, but Hitchcock was coming into, he didn't want to do 3D, which was like a huge thing in the early to mid 50s. Everybody was kind of cashing in on these 3D movies and trying to get people into the cinema. And, because TV sets were kind of a thing and people, he's trying to get people to leave the home and go to the movies. And Hitchcock and the studio kind of talked Hitchcock into doing Dial M as a 3D movie. So there's a lot. So when you watch it back, knowing that, there's a lot of really interesting things done with the camera and the props and the shots. A lot of lower
Mm,
angle shots that Hitchcock's not really known for. He's known more for the wide stuff. A lot of like props and stuff in the foreground, which he's also not known for. And knowing like, oh, okay, well, it was all to make the 3D kind of aesthetic a little more, easy to pull off in 1954. And he was against it, but he did it. The studio forced his hand to do that. And also that this is based on a play. And when you watch it as
mhm,
a movie, it's a very different Hitchcock film for the first reason I just mentioned, but also because it predominantly takes place in this one apartment, really, this one house, and that's the only major setting in the film. There's a couple other shots, but I mean, generally, like 90% of the movie's in this one place. So for those two reasons, it's just a really kind of outlier in Hitchcock's catalog, and it's really kind of fascinating part of movie history and of the history of his films too. So I love the story kind of behind Dial M for Murder, but it's also a really cool kind of like murder mystery as well from the 50s, which I know we're talking Hitchcock tonight, but I don't really get into movies that are like pre 1960 ish. I
mhm.
definitely don't revisit them very often. When my grandmother was around, I would, she'd throw one on and I'd watch it with her and I'd really enjoy it. But I'm not like rushing to throw in movies from the 50s. But I can remember this one. I think it holds up pretty well and I really enjoyed it. What do you think about this one? Is it coming up on your list or do you want to say anything about it?
It's not coming up on my list, but I do like this movie too. It's another limited setting one, like you mentioned, everything's in the one apartment. He gave himself a limitation. He did the innovation of the 3D, and this one has been remade multiple times too. Both direct, Dial M for Murder, and then inspired, a spin-off movie. I remember had Gwyneth Paltrow, but I don't remember the title of that movie. But it's definitely
Oh yeah, I
one
know what you're
that
talking about.
has, yeah, it's like a movie that's very loved by people, even if they're not familiar with Hitchcock's work.
Yep. And it's, I mean, it was based on a play, so obviously it's not his story. But
Yeah.
when you factor in that kind of murder mystery, on paper, I mean, Hitchcock turned it into what it was. I mean, what it became. So, and
Hmm.
I love the story. I love the story and the history behind it too, and how you can kind of like see, like when you watch, like if you did a marathon of his movies, I imagine this one would look a lot different than all the other ones, and that's very interesting to me. But it's also seen as one of his best, which is weird because it's not visually,
Hmm.
it doesn't hit you as like a Hitchcock movie, which I think is really cool as well.
Yeah, it
So
has
that's my
like
number
the
five.
telephone. Yeah, the telephone,
Right,
like as a prop. That's another thing. It's not a shower, but
right.
it's a telephone, and you might always be picking up the telephone and think you have to look behind you, and make sure there's nobody behind the curtains.
Yep, yep. He does that so beautifully. He really does. And that's actually a great call out in terms of the phone in this movie. Absolutely.
Mhm.
I think the tagline, I have it here in front of me actually. If a woman answers, hang on for dear life. It's the tagline on the poster, which I think is great as well. All right, so that's my number five, and it swings us over to you for your four.
Okay, so my number four is the 1957 Rope. Another
Mm,
limited setting, or special sandbox that Hitchcock gave himself, which is doing a movie in one take. It wasn't an actual one take, of course. He did have different breaks, but they are as invisible as possible. And the scenario here is, what if we killed someone together and put them in a chest and then served dinner on top of that chest?
hmm
I mean, how sick is that? It's such a wonderful concept for a movie, though. It's a very suspenseful movie. It keeps you, the way they do things. We know that there's this body in this chest, and there might be opportunities for people to discover that. And the two guys that are responsible for this set up this concept so that they're getting off on the fact that this is happening, but we, the audience, are also experiencing that with them. And it has an amazing role for Jimmy Stewart as well, playing this professor that has taught them and didn't know what the weight of his words would do. And it just gives you a really interesting, um, thing to think about, like what are the dangers of teaching, and just lots of things you can discuss after. I like discussing things, so this is
hmm
one you can have a great conversation about, if you're imbibing alcohol or not. I mean, this is just a great movie all around, and I've gotten to see this one on the big screen several times and always really, really love that.
Well, it's another one on my to
Have you
do
seen
list.
Rope?
No, I haven't. I literally added it to my watch list on Letterboxd as you were talking. So far you're two for two on Hitchcock movies that I need to see. I couldn't believe that I'd only seen a literal handful, knowing that he did 59 films. But it just really makes me realize, especially like maybe when this Halloween season comes up, I maybe need to do a Hitchcock kind of binge and get through some of these. And
Mhm.
I'll start with the ones that you mentioned because you know what you're talking about. So Rope, one that I have not seen, but that's your number four. My number four is a movie that I do remember a lot more vividly than my first pick for Dial M, and that's from 1958. It's a movie called Vertigo. And Vertigo is a movie that I've seen a few times since, and this is one that's a little fresher in my memory than some of the other ones that I'll be talking about tonight because it's a film that really like sits with you and really makes you kind of consider the different themes and kind of like what was going on in Hitchcock's mind. What does he want us to think about what we're seeing? And to be honest with you, it's a 1958 film, and I really still haven't have a full grasp on it. And I think that is what is so awesome about just movies in general, is that they can really just kind of embed themselves in your brain, and you're just constantly trying to figure stuff out and think about, themes and pathos and the director's vision and that kind of thing. And Vertigo is one of those, like a perfect example of that. But, we have Jimmy Stewart here again, who does great in this role. This is a movie that I feel like is like a cinematic vision of like the male gaze too, because Madeline, who he's kind of pining over, and there's a lot of kind of like sexual undertones, and it's a
Mm.
very lustful kind of, once Jimmy Stewart kind of gets involved in following her, and almost creepy to a certain extent, honestly. Of course, we find out that essentially she was not real, and it was all a ruse to kind of have this elaborate murder from his friend that had hired him in the beginning of the movie. And Jimmy Stewart's kind of fear of heights plays into the whole thing. So Hitchcock does a lot of these ruses in this film, and it's a very beautiful movie, like very vivid colors. I can remember there's one scene where he kind of sees Madeline for the first time, and he's obviously infatuated with her, and she's like a perfect woman. And he, like, the audience kind of thinks that too, the way she's filmed, and there's like this glow around her. I mean, Hitchcock does all these things to kind of go out of his way to say this is the perfect person here. And Jimmy Stewart sees her, and as she's like leaving this restaurant, the walls are red, and she's
Right.
leaving, and Hitchcock does this lighting effect where like the wall kind of like glows behind her, and it's through
Mm.
Jimmy's eyes. It's what he sees. Yeah, I mean, like I said, essentially she's not real. At least that's my take on it. Judy and the whole thing. So it's like a kind of a double take or whatever. Kind of like I don't know what you would call it, but it's like uh, they swap each other's kind of like personalities, and they're essentially the same person, is what we find out, which is kind of the plot twist at the end of Vertigo. But I love this movie. Kind of,
Hope
like I
everybody's
said,
seen it.
yeah, I know, right? Well, it's a 1958 movie. I mean, I don't, I'm not trying to not spoil a movie that's 70 years old at this point, but yeah, if you haven't, sorry. So there you go. What do you think of Vertigo? That's my number 4.
Well, it's coming up later on my list, so I'll save my comments.
Okay, cool. I'm glad to hear that, because I thought you were going to have 5 I never heard of, or I haven't seen. So I'm glad to hear that. All right, well, we'll just
Not at
pop
all.
over to you then. I'll let you hold your commentary. We'll pop over to you. What is your number 3, Lindsay?
My number 3 is The Man Who Knew Too Much. This is a really interesting movie, Gerald, because we hear about people remaking other people's movies, but how often do you have a director that remakes his own movie? Alfred Hitchcock directed a black and white version of The Man Who Knew Too Much in 1934 and then remade it in 1956. Now, I've never really asked myself the question, well, why did he decide to remake it? And
Mhm.
what it came down to, it looks like it was a contractual obligation of some sort
Oh,
that
okay.
Alfred Hitchcock
I
needed
didn't know
to
that either.
fulfill. So he needed to do another movie for a particular studio. And so he thought this one would translate really well. But I love this. Both the versions are very good. They're very different in tone. But this second one stars again. Uh, it has Doris
Jimmy
Day
Stewart.
and Jimmy Stewart, right? And this is the scenario is they go on vacation in French Morocco. Their child is kidnapped, and they are trying to save him at the same time as they get involved with state secrets. And it becomes a balancing act of, we want to be on the good side, but we also need to protect our child. So they have this dilemma that they're bridging together as a couple. The best known scene about this movie is this orchestra scene where we know that when the cymbals crash, this man is going to be killed. And so there's this very long, ah, yes, K Sarah Sarah, we got a comment. Hi, Tony D. um, and that song comes back up in the is in the new Evil Dead trailer,
Evil
right,
Dead
Gerald?
Rise. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. They nailed that. Yeah.
So it's the orchestra scene, though, I should have looked up before how long it lasts, but it's a long scene of 10 minutes, and Hitchcock successfully builds tension through this entire musical score, and that ends on this cymbal crash, and you just feel like you can't stand anymore if this cymbal crash doesn't come.
Hmm.
So it's a wonderful movie, very fun, very lively. It's a international location. It takes you out of the United States, and just gave has a wonderful performance from everybody. So have
Hmm.
you seen this one, Gerald?
I have. It's been a long time. It's in my honorable mentions. It's one of the ones that I remember really enjoying. I actually didn't know it was a remake, and I definitely didn't know it was a remake of his own film until you just told me that. So, and then I see it in the description here on Letterbox after you said that. So I didn't even know that. I only know the version that you're mentioning, but yeah, good film. I wish I could remember it a little more clearly because I am what I am. You know what I mean? I'm getting old,
Mhm.
but it's a good one. It's some honorable mentions. Now, my number three, Lindsay, I assume you'll have it, or maybe at least in your honorables, but it's from 1954's Rear Window. And you're talking about Hitchcock kind of creating these tropes that we've seen 100 times. This is another one. I mean, this is a film about voyeurism, and it's a film about, I just saw a movie. One of my favorite movies last year was a film called Watcher with Michael Monroe, and it's basically the
Mhm.
same plot. The only difference is the guy across the courtyard or whatever is a serial killer, as opposed to just this one murder or whatever. But it's essentially the same plot. And then you have Disturbia with Shia LaBeouf that came out like 15 years ago. I mean, it's just been done 100 times. It's kind of like lurking stalker
Last
in the
year,
shadows.
Kimmy also that just came out, the movie Kimmy. Have you seen that one?
No, I haven't. Is that the same premise as
Oh,
well?
okay. Yeah, it's
Same.
just Steven Soderbergh. I think it was a movie that came out just last year. Kimmy.
I think I know what you're talking about, but I don't think I saw that one. But yeah. But anyway,
With Zoe Kravitz, yeah.
yeah, cool. And Jimmy Stewart again, Grace Kelly here, which by the way, she was in Dial In for Murder as well. But yeah, I love when he works with her too. And it's just this kind of like it's a mystery. Like you don't really know until the very, very end. It ends really tragically, but it all kind of comes together to where you finally see what's going on. But I just love this movie. This is one that I've also seen. In fact, my top three I've seen probably 10 times each, at least. So this
Mhm.
is another one that I love and I revisit often. I think it's one of his best. And I love that you can see that subgenre, if you will, of horror and thriller kind of being created here, really. And now, Rear Window. I mean, there's at least one or two quote unquote Rear Window movies every year, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
voyeuristic kind of thriller horror aspects. And we didn't see it cinematically really before this. At least I didn't. So I think of it as one of the pillars of that kind of subgenre, and I love it. So there you go, Rear Window. What do you think of this one?
A Lover Window. It's not in my list, but I
Oh,
love
okay,
that
all right.
movie. How do you pick from 58 movies? I mean, it's tough,
I know.
but
I know.
I
Well,
love that one.
you just have to be me and only see 10 of them, and then it'll be a little bit easier for you. I couldn't believe that. I was so surprised by that. Okay, so that's my number three, Rear Window. We are up to our runner ups. Lindsay Dunn, what do you got at number two?
Okay, my number 2 is The Birds. This
Damn
is
right.
1963. And I think we all probably know what the concept is, but it's what if birds turned against us humans, and how would we
Hmm.
protect ourselves from that? I like a small town horror, and I think that's what a small town horror slash thriller, whatever you want to call this. But I like this one, how she goes to the little town of Bodega Bay. You get to know the characters that work there. There's this wonderful scene that takes place in a diner or a restaurant, and all of the people are talking about the what's going on and what could happen, and it's very, very frightening. And then you have a fire outside, but that Like I watch a movie right now, like The Mist, at the Stephen King's The Mist, making that. And again, you have the people in the store that are all gathering and trying to hide together and survive basically. And it's just a wonderful, I don't um movie all over. I think one of the most famous scenes, I love that scene in the diner, but the other scene that always gets me is when the birds are just gathering on the playground equipment while the kids
Oh yeah, sure.
are they're singing the children's song, and as they're singing the song, each verse, more and more birds begin to land, and it's the camera just effectively keeps cutting back and forth between Tippi Hedren smoking her cigarette, and then
Hmm.
more birds come by, and she's not really noticing this even until it's way too late.
Right.
It's masterfully done, and I'm
It
sure
is.
you've probably seen the birds.
Not only have I seen it, it's also my number two. So I'm twinsies. We're twinsies.
Ooh.
Yeah, dude. This is one of the ones my grandmother introduced me to, and we watched together like 5 times over the course of the last, I don't know, 10 to 15 years. Like, it's funny because she was telling me when she was younger, when this movie came out, it scared the shit out of her. Like, she saw it in the theater, and just the effect it had on her and a lot of movie going audiences back then. I mean, you didn't have the internet, you didn't have social media, you didn't have Google. Like, this kind of shit was probably really frightening to people, and Hitchcock does it. We're going to be talking about it with my number one as well. But we as a society, generally speaking, are not afraid of birds. I mean, I know there are people that are, but I'm just saying as a general society, it's just kind of an everyday thing. They're on the phone poles or on our roof of our house. They're singing in the morning when we wake up. Like, nobody's, you don't really think of birds as like this really frightening, horrific predator, And Hitchcock
Mhm.
says, you know what? Let me change that a little bit. Let me put them together in a group of a million, and they're going to attack you. And then there's a lot of social overtones in this movie too, like
Mhm.
commentary kind of built in. I mean, the birds was a term used to describe women in the
Mhm.
1950s, and there's kind of like women in this town that are kind of butting heads and kind of trying to be the dominant female in this town. And Tippi Hedren comes in as a socialite who's really beautiful and kind of an outcast, and she's trying to fit in, and her love interest in the movie has attachments to all these other women. We presume he's a bit of a playboy. So there's a lot of kind of commentary built into to where women kind of were in society at the time that this movie was made. And Hitchcock is kind of, he's got these subtle kind of hints about that throughout the movie. And I like that too, that it's a layered film. It's not what it seems on the surface, at least not 100%. But from a
Mhm.
horrific standpoint, I mean, the dude with his eyes gouged out, that one scene, uh,
Yeah.
just fucking, I mean, that's beautiful. I mean, that's beautiful from a horror image perspective or imagery
Mhm.
perspective. It's just perfect. And it's masterfully directed. The links that Tippi Hedren went to in this movie, I've seen some documentary footage of some stuff that
Mm.
she said in interviews and stuff. And, literally having live birds thrown at her on the set, like, just throwing like 50 birds on her while it's being filmed. I mean, just that kind of stuff and that level of commitment to create just, one of the most memorable films in Hitchcock's catalog for sure. But it's also my number two. I agree with everything you said as well. So the birds were matching up there on the number twos. Nice. Are you scared of
Amazing.
birds after seeing it or no?
I'm not, but
Yeah.
I'm not scared of birds, but I should say sometimes I do when I see them gathering, that it kind of freaks me out a little bit.
Hey, this
But
is it. There they come.
yeah.
Yeah. Somebody should do this with cats. Has anybody done this with cats? Where it's just like all the cats get together and they attack humans? They haven't done that yet, have they?
Oh,
'Cause
somebody probably has. I bet
I
somebody
love
has.
cats. That'd freak me out. I'd be like, "Oh god, my cats," and then the cats are looking at you. You'd be like, "What are you guys looking at?" Yeah. So, all right, there we go. So we're up to our number ones. Lindsay, I mean, you know me, so you probably, I mean, you could talk about my number one, even if it's not yours. But go ahead. What's your
Well,
number one
Gerald's
Hitchcock
number
movie?
one is
Yes.
um my number one is Vertigo, which was
Oh
your
wow. Okay.
number four. I know.
Yep.
Right? It was number four. So
Yes.
this is done in 1958, and you already described much of it. But one thing that a couple of things that you didn't mention I think are interesting is this is one of the first movies that ever had PTSD in it, like
Hmm.
that psychological um, event or anomaly that can happen in a person's life, and so
Hmm.
it was notable for that. Hitchcock's an innovator, being able talking about these mental health issues way before any other director wanted to touch
Sure.
them. They had these things with the zoomy cameras. The special effects in it are amazing. That the cameras they built to be able to zoom in, as well as the beautiful colors, which you already entailed. There is a wonderfully animated dream sequence that's in this movie.
Yep.
Hello, it's
Hmm.
like mixed media in a an adult movie. You know, they Disney had done
Right.
some of that, but other serious movies had not done that. This nightmarish dreamscape. This wasn't the first time he'd done a dreamscape, but continuing that. And this again, this movie has inspired so many other movies and TV shows like Twin Peaks. A lot of the color schemes and the things that David Lynch got from Vertigo.
Hmm. Sure.
Also,
Yeah.
like even other genres like Portrait of a Lady on Fire. There's this green dress and the blue dress and the red
Hmm.
background, and a lot of the ways you mentioned that through Hitchcock's camera we see Jimmy Stewart falling in love with Madeline, and us as an
Hmm.
audience also falling in love with Madeline. And the same thing is done in Portrait of a Lady on Fire, where the one woman falls in love with the woman she's drawing. And so it's a movie about obsession and
Well, yeah. I
lust
mean,
and
he,
wanting to.
absolutely. And to piggyback on what you're saying, and the tracking shots in this movie too, because when Jimmy
Mhm.
Stewart's character is kind of like following her and doing his investigative work and stuff, we are too, because we're with him. The
Right.
camera's basically tracking his journey. And what was genius, because when you learn the plot twist later, you can kind of see why this was important. But he never really has contact with her directly the first like half of the movie. You know what I mean? Like he's
Mhm.
just kind of following her and watching her from afar. It's not until the Golden Gate Bridge scene when she, tries to kill herself that they kind of physically become connected. But prior to that, we're just kind of watching her with him, and the
Mhm.
way it's shot and knowing that he's our kind of lens for what we're supposed to feel for her, we start kind of feeling that way too. And a lot of that goes to the performance as well. But I
Mhm.
agree. I mean, I'm interested to ask you, because obviously you're a woman and you put Vertigo at number one, which is great. Obviously, I love it too. But I have heard criticisms of it being a little too male, if that makes sense. Like a little
Well,
too.
yeah, as you get to know them, as you start to see his movies better, you as you start to get to know Hitchcock better, when you're first discovering him, you're thinking, "Oh, these movies are genius." Later on, you're kind of, you can watch Vertigo and get really grossed out and nauseous by Jimmy Stewart's
Yeah.
behavior because
Mhm.
he's basically, in a way, he's practicing like necrophilia, and he's like, having sex with a dead woman, basically, like you said, a woman that does not exist.
Mhm.
Um, so there is a really interesting experimental movie if you want to go after you watch Vertigo. There's a movie called The Green Fog, which is I think the whole thing's on YouTube, but it's somebody who deconstructed Vertigo and made
Oh, okay.
the same movie with it's like a montage to the extreme, but it's not, no scene plays out. It's like it's really hard to describe, but it's a fun movie to experiment. But this movie is very much about voyeurism, and it is,
Mhm.
now I watch the movie and I can get grossed out by Jimmy Stewart's behavior and not like him. It's hard not to like Jimmy Stewart, but maybe that's why he wanted to play this role, because he wasn't playing like a perfect guy. I mean, he's forcing her to wear her hair a certain way and wear a certain outfit, and she's clearly uncomfortable. So it can be seen as um, a man owning a woman or wanting to
Yeah,
control her,
sure.
wanting to possess her. So
Mhm.
there's all kinds of interpretations you can put it in it. I mean, Alfred Hitchcock himself is pretty gross. I mean, like, it's gross that he made Tippi Hedren tie birds to. It wasn't just that there's commentary in these movies about women being birds, like the way he treated his stars wasn't very kind. So no, it's not
Right.
necessarily laudable, but it's like it's still fascinating, and these movies are classics that you will get entranced by.
Yeah, and you can dissect them too, which is, the kind of the fun part of
Mhm.
it too. I mean, they're going to live on forever. I mean, these kind of conversations will be happening 100 years from now. And Hitchcock was just able to do that. He was just a craftsman. He was an artist. So I love the pick. Obviously, it's in my top five as well. It's a movie that I revisit probably at least once every year or two. So I think it's a great pick. My number one, is Psycho, 1960, the movie that did well. I don't know. You could go back to Italian horror probably, but at least in America invented the slasher. So that's
Mm.
probably what I said. But that's what I'm saying now. So, I mean, what else can you say? I mean, this movie is an absolute legendary piece of filmmaking that is one of, if not the jumping point for the horror genre, which is my favorite genre of film. And I know that. And, Norman Bates's character and kind of the psychology of the character and how it's psychological in that way. It's not just, a slasher. I mean, it is, but it's also dealing with so many themes of just detachment from reality and, mental health. And like I said, the psychology of it all and what brings you to the point that Norman is at in this movie, and even in the subsequent sequels. I mean, there were some duds, but there were some that I really enjoyed too. Kind of exploring that character. I love the Bates Motel TV series that I think FX did, where it kind of tells how Norman, from a younger boy to what we found out him to be in the film. So I just love that kind of character study of this guy who at first glance is kind of like almost like a Ted Bundy type character where like he's really charismatic and handsome and kind of seems to have his shit together, has his own business. Like, what I mean? It's kind of like he's kind of cool. He's a cool dude. And then it starts to kind of unravel a little bit. And we kind of see what he's dealing with and his quote unquote mommy issues, which in 1960,
Mhm.
I mean, now you watch it
Mhm.
and you go, well, whatever. But I mean, in 1960, people seeing that twist and seeing that kind of, the cross dressing and all, I mean, that had to have been like just, I mean, I wasn't alive, but I mean, it had to have just been a profound experience and definitely a shocking one for most moviegoers, I would imagine. And the shower scene is, I don't know if I want to say this on my show because you'll come back and quote me in a couple years, but this might be this might be the most iconic scene in cinematic history, the shower scene in Psycho. I
Mm.
mean, it definitely is probably in the top 3 or 5 of scenes in movie history. It's just so well known. I mean, people that don't even know what this movie is or have never seen it know the shower scene. They
Mhm.
know the score from Herman. They know, I mean, the way that there's so many edits in that movie. And as somebody who does video editing and kind of like toys around with it a little bit, I can't even fucking fathom what they did in this movie in 1960, where you're
Mhm.
cutting celluloid basically to edit films. And they've
Yeah.
got like something crazy, like 100 different cuts in the shower scene. I mean, it's insane. They couldn't show blood on camera, so they had the inventive, or they couldn't show it from a human body, I should say. So they had these kind of inventive shots with the blood going down the drain, which is also iconic. So yeah, I mean, Bernard Herrmann's score, the imagery from this movie, Norman Bates as a quote unquote horror villain, all of it is iconic. All of it is a springboard to everything that I love and that you love, and anybody that likes horror loves today. It all started with Psycho and movies like that in the 60s and 50s and 60s. And you can see the influence, and I love it. It's my favorite Hitchcock film. It's definitely the one I've seen the most. Um, it's my favorite. I can't believe it's not on your list, though. Did you not do that because you knew I was going to have it, or are you just not a fan of it?
Oh, no, I love it. I mean,
Okay, good.
Psycho is I remember, my parents went to bed. It was like the time at a certain point, my mom said, "You can stay up as late as you want now. You don't have a bedtime, but you have to get up for school in the morning." And I stayed up and I watched Psycho, and I was, in high school. I couldn't believe that the lead character died. I mean, talk about shocking. There was many things that shocked. I mean, having your lead protagonist die. That's why they didn't let nobody could come in to the movie once it started. So there was a lot about this movie, but even before you meet Norman Bates, you got this concept of Marion's got this money, and you're thinking you're gonna follow the money across, and that ends up being I guess, a MacGuffin, or like a a thing that doesn't really end up counting in the big picture. But yeah, this movie is crazy. It's one I've studied a lot, looking at the way that Hitchcock uses light and shadow and mirroring between Marion and Norman. Yeah, this movie, it's great. I'm not saying it's not great.
No, no, yeah,
But
sure.
yeah. Yeah.
All right, sweet. Well, if nothing else, we had a little, mix. I mean, I'm looking at your list here, and 2 of your 5 I haven't seen. So I'm on that. I got it on my to-do list. I actually added the rope as you were talking about it on Letterboxd. I got to go back and do the same thing for Lifeboat. So I'm going to check those out for sure. There's where our top 5 Hitchcock movies directed by Alfred Hitchcock with Lindsay Dunn. I tell you what, Lindsay, let's take a quick break. I got the Golden Peas Movie Awards coming up. The ceremony is on March 13th. Voting is open. So I want to run a promo so everybody knows where to find that. Just head over to 2peasonapod.com/golden peas and cast your vote. You guys are deciding the winners this year. And like I said, we'll announce them on March 13th. So let's take a quick break, Lindsay, and then when we come back, we will wrap up our list and give some honorable mentions. You have like 54 honorable mentions, you said, right? I'm kidding. We'll be right back, guys. Everybody sit tight. Lindsay, you doing good?
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool. Let's see. What are they saying over the chat? Dan Brennick, when you're listening to this while you're editing, you got to take all this out, dude. Let's see. What the hell is Yanni saying here? This is a lot of words. What? Films.
She's talking about Mount Rushmore, I guess, with referencing North by Northwest.
When Northwest, yeah. When he says, "I don't like the way what you call it's looking at me" or whatever. Yeah, that's a good one. Tony says Kimmy rules.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. He wanted to make sure he knew.
Yeah, I was like, wait a second. Who are you talking to?
He's talking to me. Kimmy rules.
I have
I guess
like
I
a bottle of water here. Yeah.
I do need a beer though. He's right. Kimmy, I think I know that movie. Is that so? That's a Rear Window.
Zoe Kravitz. Yeah, it's a Rear Window ripoff. I shouldn't say ripoff. It's a very good movie.
It's 2022.
Yeah, it's a COVID Rear Window movie.
Oh.
And she's agoraphobic too.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely need to get on that then. I love her. I love the premise. So crack this open. Do you drink, Lindsay? Have we talked about this?
I do. I don't tend to drink when I'm podcasting because, well, it can mess with your throat. You're trying to
Oh well, yeah, that's true.
Like I have sometimes need a throat clearing problem. I don't want to do that.
Yeah. I get it. Yeah, I mean, you'll either find me drinking beer or coffee when I podcast. It's the weirdest combos, but it depends on how tired I am, and I'm not tired tonight, so I was having a few beers.
Well, why did you wait, Christopher, to hear it when it drops? Should have just been on with us the whole time.
He does that a lot. He's a patron, and he so aside from the video that's on right now, I put the episode on Patreon as soon as it's edited. But Yanni's one of those people that's a purist, so he listens to it on its release day. Right, Chris? Like, he just likes to do that. So, and he was making dinner and stuff, he says. All right, that's fine. People have to eat, I guess. Sure.
You're allowed.
Yeah, I guess you can eat. I mean, All right. Give me like 5 seconds. I'll come back in and we will wrap up and do the honorable mentions, okay? Welcome back, guys. As I said pre-break, Lindsay Dunn is here from One of My Stories. and we just had a great conversation about Alfred Hitchcock doing our top 5 films from Mr. Hitchcock. Lindsay, why don't you remind everybody what your 5 were real quick before you give your honorables?
Okay, my number 5 was Lifeboat. Number 4, Rope. Number 3, The Man Who Knew Too Much. Number 2, The Birds. And number 1, Vertigo.
Nicely done. My top 5 was number 5 was Dial M for Murder. My number 4 was Vertigo. My number 3 was Rear Window. We matched up on our number 2, which was The Birds. And my number 1 was, of course, Psycho, which is literally no surprise to anyone that's hearing this right now. So anybody that listens to my show is like, okay, well, let's see what the other 4 are. We know what number 1 is. And you're right. That's my number 1, Psycho.
Mhm.
Lindsay, what did you have in your honorable mentions? I've only got 3 because, as I was telling you up top, I've only seen about 10 Hitchcock movies from start to finish, at least that I remember.
Yeah.
So I picked 3 that I at least felt like I could confirmably talk about. You know what I mean? What about you? What do you have in your honorable mentions over there?
So I have Shadow of a Doubt. And this is What If Your Uncle Was a Serial Killer? So that's a good,
Ah,
it's a great one.
that old chestnut.
Notorious has famous for a 2.5-minute kiss and the famous uranium in the wine cellar MacGuffin
Mm,
that doesn't end up playing out, but that is another
mm,
honorable mention.
okay,
Strangers on a Train.
that's a good one. I
n-
know that one.
the old crisscross that was used from Throw Mama from the Train.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
North by Northwest, which was referenced in the chat, and Marnie, which is a
Never heard of
very
that one.
late Hitchcock that people should check out. This one is specifically about childhood trauma. Another one that
Oh.
was people did not like when it first came out, and now it's
Mm-hmm.
considered another hit from Hitchcock. Very a much, very less known Hitchcock that people should seek out. Another Tippi
Well, you
Hedren role.
okay? Nice. Well, you mentioned all mine, but my number 6 would have been Strangers on a Train. I love that, like you said, swip swap, crisscross. Like I love that kind of mystery element. And we've seen that before too. That's another one that Hitchcock kind of coined a little bit early on.
Mhm.
But this is definitely probably the best example of it. I don't know if it's because it's the most original, but I love Strangers on a Train. Just a great premise and a great movie by Hitchcock. The Man Who Knew Too Much, you also mentioned. And then my number 8 would have been North by Northwest. So that's another one that I've seen a few times that, I love that the thriller aspect to it. I love kind of like the setting. That one I remember being a little funny too. Like it had some
Mhm.
comedic kind of like hints to it, which was weird for Hitchcock. But I remember kind of laughing at some of the stuff in North by Northwest. Not because it wasn't self aware, just because there was kind of some like inadvertent comedy built into it, which I really enjoyed. So that would round out my top 8, which is going to upset some regular listeners because I always round up my top 10. But I didn't want to do that tonight because I wanted to be authentic. And there's just too many that I don't remember vividly enough to really talk about. So there you go. That's our favorite Hitchcock movies and then some. Lindsay, what I like to do to end every episode is head over to social media and see what the fans had to say in the old suggestion box. So let me pull that up real quick and see what they had to say. I said, what are some of your favorite Alfred Hitchcock films? And they said, Joey Austin, patron and friend of the show, says The Birds. He said his mom was deadly afraid of birds. I think that's what I was kind of telling you about my grandmother as well.
Mhm.
Josh Ragland says, sadly, Hitchcock is a huge blind spot for him. He doesn't think he's seen any of his films. Wow. Not even Psycho, Josh. That kind of surprises me. I'll have to message Josh when the show's over and get him some suggestions over there. Patrick Sherwood says Psycho, Rear Window, and Rope. There you go. The Rope mentioned. Tony, patron and friend of the show, he's also watching us in the chat right now. Thank you so much, Tony. He says Dial M for Murder, North by Northwest, Notorious, Strangers on a Train, and To Catch a Thief. You know that one, Lindsay?
Do I know? Yeah, I know about To Catch a Thief. Yeah, it's a good
That
movie with Grace Kelly.
okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that one. Julio said the Gus Van Sant remake of Psycho. Julio, and I told him to get the hell out of the chat. So yeah, he did that for his show last year, the remake of Psycho. He did that for his podcast, and he liked it, and we all kind of gave him shit about it
Mm.
over in our chat. So, what did you see the Vince Vaughn remake? I'm assuming
Oh
you did
yeah.
not like it, right?
I went in with an open mind because I thought, all right, Hitchcock was into experimenting, so I was like, all right, let's see, do the exact same shots. Can the magic be repeated? And we all found out, no, it cannot.
Talk about shot by shot remakes, huh? Let's
Mhm.
see. Paul from the Countdown, who you joined with us last night. We did our 2022 films, but he said it's Psycho, then everything else, but Rebecca is dead last. We didn't mention Rebecca tonight. How do you feel about that one? Did you see that remake? It came out last year.
I saw the remake. I prefer the original, of course, but that's a
Hmm.
favorite of my mom's. I feel like that one is very different in feel to other Hitchcock
It
movies as
is, yeah.
well.
It is. I agree with that. David Powell, patron and friend of the show, says Vertigo, Rear Window, Notorious, Psycho, Rebecca, North by Northwest, Rope, and Strangers on a Train. So I think we mentioned pretty much all of his except for Rebecca tonight. So good
Mhm.
list there, David. Chris Yaney, my main dude, he's also watching over on YouTube right now. He said Vertigo, North by Northwest, and Rear Window is his number one. And I could easily see that being number one. I think that was my three, but I do love that movie. So that's a good list there, Yaney. Amanda, dear friend of mine, dear friend of the show, says North by Northwest, Rear Window, Rebecca, Notorious, To Catch a Thief. And then she says, can you tell I like Cary Grant? Cary Grant is in a lot of this. I think that's it. I think that's it, guys. Thank you so much for the feedback this week. We did get a lot of comments for Alfred Hitchcock, and it means a lot to me. Lindsay Dunn is here, one of my stories. And like I said, she's kind of becoming a show regular, to be honest with you. She was just on last week. We did our 2022 movies. She was on this past October. We did Blumhouse movies. We're probably going to be doing movie reviews together in the near future. At least I hope so. I got my fingers crossed. But yeah, you're my partner now. I don't know if I told you, but you're going to be joining me here frequently. So, but until then, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you and look you up online, Lindsay?
I'm at oneofmystories.com. That's number one of my stories. You can also find me on Twitter, Letterboxd, YouTube, SoundCloud, and Apple Podcasts at One of My Stories. Now, Gerald, before we sign off, I want to give you a challenge. I want you to think
Mm-hmm.
about something. I know you said you're going to watch some more Hitchcock movies, maybe in October.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know your rule of you only cover each topic one time on this podcast, but with 58
Mm-hmm.
movies, maybe consider doing another, Hitchcock movie after you've seen more of the catalog. I'd be really interested in seeing how once you've seen some more of his catalog later on.
Interesting. Interesting. You know what we could do is we could do like a ranking video, and I could have you on for that. We could do it on YouTube as opposed to like a podcast episode.
Mhm.
But you're probably right though. Although I don't how can the Birds and Psycho not be my one and two? I mean, they're gonna be my one and two. I'm just telling you. I mean, I just love those movies so much. I mean, maybe I'll get surprised. I don't know. I love Vertigo. I don't see that dropping out of here. I don't know. I'll
Mhm.
I'll take the challenge. I just don't know. My list
Yeah.
might be the same. But I'll give it a shot. Or maybe I could do like, my top 5 Hitchcock, not including Psycho, because there's no way that's not going to be number 1, but I just
Just
love it
something to
so
think
much.
about. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. No, I'll accept it. Sure. Well, Lindsay, it means a lot to me that you're here again. I don't think we have anything planned on the calendar, but who knows? I mean, I call on you, so you might be back sooner than later. But thanks so much for being here. It was a blast talking about Alfred Hitchcock with you. So once again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And guys, thank you for tuning in. We will be back next week. I'll have another guest and another top 5 for you. Until then, everybody take care. All right. My left contact, Lindsay, we're done, by the way. But I'm going to end the broadcast so it can save your recording.
Yeah.
Anybody that's chatting with us over there, we're going to lose you on YouTube. I think it's just Tony and Chris, but I love you guys. Thank you for watching.
Mm.
Let me end this.